I want to talk about personal responsibility for a moment. Now, this is a big topic that gets people really upset, really, really upset for a number of reasons. One of the big reasons is that, there's a difference between, which I'm going to go into in a second, but there's a difference between responsibility and fault, which I will hop into. But I remember, and I'm going to have to ask our in-house philosopher. Well, he's probably busy taking your calls right now. But I think it was Kafka that said something like, and I'm going to botch the words on this, but the idea was, he said, I went out into the night sky, I looked up at the universe, and I said, I exist. To which the universe responded, that evokes no sense of responsibility in me. Well, there's some issues around that statement. But the reason I like it is that we come into life not having a lot of responsibility, right? You got to pretty much just show up and, if you're hungry, you don't have to take responsibility for your hunger and go to the fridge and get something to eat. Somebody else takes responsibility to you, really. There's a responsibility for others and a responsibility to others. But your caretaker, your mom, your dad, your whoever it was there. When you're upset, they see that as that's my problem because they are a parent. They're taking responsibility for that. Well, gradually over this course of something we call maturity, there is a gradual offloading and hopefully a requirement for the child to begin to slowly take responsibility for things that were done for them until they show up in life at various stages. Um, Mom or dad might put the food in your mouth in the beginning, but at some point they're going to say, pick up your own broccoli. They might take care of deposits you leave in your diaper for a while. And then at some point, they're going to go, I'm going to turn that responsibility over to you. And by the way, don't leave them in your diaper. Leave them in that little lake over there with the porcelain wrapper. And then they're going to pick your friends for you. But at some point, they're going to say, who do you want to play with? And if you make good choices, I like Johnny, he gives me cookies versus, I don't want to be with Joey. He throws sand in my eyes. Good choice. You can be responsible now for picking your own friends. I'm going to turn ownership of that part of your life over to you. And it just goes on from there. Well, we got a couple of issues with that. And I'm just going to name a couple of them. This isn't a long webinar I'm doing, but I just want to give us some things to think about, which affect the emotional and relationship life. And let's just start. If you go back to the book Boundaries that we wrote, we have a section there called the laws of boundaries. And one of the laws is responsibility for and responsibility to. Now, that basically means that each of us is responsible for ourselves. We are responsible to others, to how we behave to them, for how we extend help and support to them, etc. But to do that well, you've got to take responsibility for yourself, which basically what we're talking about in the mental health world, they use a lot of different terms, but one of them is agency. And agency means that basically I am empowered for myself. So why is this important? Well, going back to actually with Stephen Crane, I got there's a correction for my first correction of the day. I take responsibility for that. A man said to the universe, "Sir, I exist. However," replied the universe, "the fact has not created in me a sense of obligation." But a lot of times people walk around and they do feel like somebody else is obligated to take care of how they feel, or, some other aspect of their lives. And that's where we get into the enabling. Here's what, and I don't even know where to start on this. Start with research, anecdotal experience, life. Hopefully, your parents have said and proven for years that when something exists inside of my skin, I've got to take responsibility for that. Now, that does not necessarily mean fault. Sometimes it does, but responsibility in the existential sense, and I think in the biblical sense and in the mental health sense, means that if I'm feeling or thinking or doing something, the ownership, not fault, and responsibility, not fault. I may be really unhappy because of the way someone is treating me. They're violating the law of responsibility too. But what that leaves me with, if I wait on an abusive person to make me feel better or expect a critical person, is the only way I'm going to not feel bad inside is for them to turn into a nice person. I don't have the agency to make them do that. Only they do. I do have the agency to say, you know what? I'm feeling put down here. I'm going to take responsibility, not fault. I'm going to take responsibility for the fact that I don't like the way I feel. And I am going to execute my human choice and agency to change the way I feel. Now, that opens up a world of options, right? We can do some things in our head. Every now and then, if you speak or write books or something, people don't like what you say and you get hate mail, or you get sometimes very valid criticism. Well, what can I do in my head? Well, when I get those, the first thing I do is I ask, what's true about this? I mean, maybe their criticism is really good. That's how we get better. Take responsibility for the fact that I have said something that for some reason this person's having this response to. How did I say it that could have added to that problem? What did I say that might be wrong that I need to recant, or change or learn about? See, to take responsibility means sometimes it's in our head. Now, the reason I said in our head is sometimes you'll get criticism, and you just disagree with it. If I said 2 + 2 is 4, and somebody wrote me hate mail about, I'll never listen to you again, I'm canceling you. That's so, whatever. And I I started to say tape. Remember the old thing, we got tapes in your head? Well, now I got, what is it? I don't know what a digital file in my head, that when somebody criticizes me, it says I'm bad. Okay. Well, that's where I need to take responsibility, do some head work and change my head of how criticism feels to me. And sometimes I'd say, thanks for your opinion. You know, I disagree. I don't feel bad about saying a 2 + 2 is 4. Sorry you're upset about it. We can talk. But sometimes we take responsibility in our mind to change how we're internalizing what somebody else does. Now they got to take responsibility for what they're saying. That's a different issue. But I do have agency to not feel, and you have agency to not feel as bad as people are wanting to make you feel. Now, in the beginning, it may do that, but then what can I do? I could go to a support group. I could go to a therapist. I could begin to change my attitude. If you go to the performance area of life, one of the biggest things that I learned, and fortunately, oh, thank God, when I was first starting out in the business world, I learned, started studying all this financial stuff, right? Well, I learned that it's much more foundationally about the way we think and what we believe than external circumstances. And when we begin to take responsibility for how we view the world and how we view our agency and our ability and the ability to do something different, no matter what's going on around us, and look at options, then the world just gets so much bigger. It gets so much more positive, feel empowered. So please do not send me any emails saying I'm victim bashing. I'm not victim bashing. I believe in victims, that people get victimized because other people are not being responsible to them in the way they're acting. And they're actually causing the misery that lives within their skin. Okay. But if I walk out here today and cross the street and a drunk driver hits me, that's not my fault. Okay. But I'm lying on the street with some injuries that are not my fault. But what I'm going to find is I'm the one that's got to go to physical therapy and get my strength back. I've got to own the situation, the agency that I have in my situation to change whatever that is to the degree that I can change it. It's not my fault. And in fact, because it is their fault, I can take responsibility and go find a personal injury attorney and I can sue them. But see, I've got to take ownership of that. I got to make the call. I got to find the attorney. I got to testify. If I'm depressed, for example, or someone's depressed, it may very well, not be their fault that they're depressed. It could be a lot of different factors. It could be biological. It could be because somebody abused them. It could be because somebody abandoned them. It could be somebody that's treating them badly. But when I used to do a lot of hospital work, somebody checks in, they're so relieved that we are going to fix them. And in a certain kind of sense, we are. We're going to help and we're going to make it better. But they've got to go to group. They got to go to their therapist and start talking. They might have to make some growth steps that take agency. And that's a big part of coming out of a feeling of powerlessness in life. So, where does that take us? Well, just ask yourself this question. What if I took ownership? And again, I'm not saying fault, so not victim bashing here, but what if I took ownership for this list of things? We called these in the Boundaries book the treasures that live in your heart. And as Jesus said in one of my favorite verses, don't give what is holy to dogs. See, take responsibility and set some boundaries because they'll trample you, he said. They'll cut you up and eat you and bite you and a bunch of other paraphrased verbs. But take responsibility. If you're around dogs, set some boundaries, okay? Because the treasures, he said, lie within your heart, mind, and soul. So take a list of these treasures, all right? Your feelings, your attitudes, your behaviors, your choices, your limits, your thoughts, your talents, the things that you love. Just start with that list: feelings, attitudes, behaviors, talents, thoughts, loves, choices, values, loves. That's my stuff. If one of those isn't where I want it to be, I've got to take on. That's my feeling. Okay. So what am I going to do about it? It's just like a property. It's your house or your apartment. If somebody does something near your neighbor and it's leaving your house disturbed, well, the first responsibility is say, I've got to set a boundary. Well, secondly, I might have to get the thing repainted after they egged it or something. But I can sue them for that. That's their responsibility. But I got to do something. All this is about is empowering you. Take ownership. Take the step that's necessary If your kid is out of control, well, what does a parent need to do? And on and on and on.